December 12, 2025. Eastern Europe is gripped by a new kind of chill, the return of nuclear weapons to its doorstep. Russia has moved tactical nuclear weapons into Belarus, its closest ally, just miles from NATO's eastern border. This is a seismic shift, not just a military maneuver but a bold political message from Moscow. The old rules no longer apply. For people in Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia, the nuclear threat is no longer a distant memory. It's a present danger. The anxieties of the Cold War have returned, and the world is watching, uncertain of Russia's next move. Every military exercise, every political statement, is now scrutinized through this new nuclear lens. Is this a bluff, a real threat, or something in between? NATO and its allies are forced to reconsider their entire security strategy. The deployment challenges the unity and resolve of the Western alliance, raising urgent questions with no easy answers. How can NATO reassure its most vulnerable members without escalating the crisis? The placement of Russian nuclear weapons in Belarus is a direct challenge to the post-Cold War order. It forces Europe and the world to confront the terrifying possibility that the nuclear taboo could be broken. The stakes are global, not just regional. The decisions made now will shape international security for decades. The fragile peace of the 21st century is under threat. The shadow of nuclear weapons has returned to Europe, and the world holds its breath. To grasp today's crisis, we must revisit Belarus's nuclear past. As a Soviet republic, Belarus hosted a vast arsenal of nuclear weapons aimed at the West. After the Soviet collapse in 1991, Belarus briefly became the world's third largest nuclear power, on paper. But under international pressure, Belarus chose denuclearization, transferring all warheads back to Russia by 1996. In return, the Budapest Memorandum promised Belarus security and respect for its borders from Russia, the US, and the UK. For nearly 3 decades, Belarus was a non-nuclear state, its constitution enshrining this status. That changed in 2022, when a constitutional amendment stripped Belarus of its non-nuclear status. This paved the way for today's deployment of Russian nuclear arms. The optimism of the 1990s has vanished, replaced by the grim realities of renewed great power rivalry. Belarus's journey from nuclear host to denuclearized state, and back again, mirrors the dramatic shifts in Europe's security landscape. The promises of the past have unraveled. The nuclear threat is no longer history, it's the new reality. Belarus's story is now the prologue to a dangerous present. The world must reckon with the consequences. Russia's nuclear deployment in Belarus is no secret. Putin and Lukashenko have openly boasted about it. These are tactical, lower-yield weapons, not Cold War-era strategic missiles. Delivered by systems like the Iskander-M and Su-25 jets, they make the threat more flexible and unpredictable. Satellite images show new high-security bunkers at Belarusian bases, confirming the buildup. Belarusian crews are training in Russia to handle these weapons. This is not just rhetoric, but a real military escalation. By placing nuclear arms in Belarus, Russia extends its nuclear reach deep into Europe, putting NATO's eastern members within closer range. Warning times are shorter, and NATO's defensive calculations are more complex. This is nuclear coercion. Russia is using the threat to intimidate neighbors and deter NATO from intervening, especially over Ukraine. The move deepens Belarus's dependence on Moscow and mirrors NATO's own nuclear sharing, but with a destabilizing twist. Unlike NATO's arrangements, this is a forward deployment into a new territory during an active conflict. The region is fundamentally destabilized. The nuclear balance in Europe has shifted. The world is now on edge. Russia claims its deployment in Belarus is no different from NATO's nuclear sharing, but the reality is starkly different. NATO's program stores US nuclear bombs in 5 allied countries, but their use requires consensus and US authorization. NATO's arrangement is a legacy of the Cold War, designed for deterrence and alliance cohesion. Russia's move is a new, destabilizing action taken during a major European war. In NATO, the US maintains strict control over its weapons. Host nations cannot use them independently. Russia promises similar control, but transparency is lacking, and command and control ambiguities are a real concern. NATO's sharing is about collective defense. Russia's deployment is about projecting power and intimidating neighbors. By moving nuclear weapons into Belarus, Russia is deliberately raising tensions and testing NATO's resolve. The context, purpose, and risks are fundamentally different. This is not about parity, it's about escalation. The nuclear landscape in Europe is more volatile than ever. The stakes for miscalculation are dangerously high. The world is watching closely. For NATO, Russian nuclear weapons in Belarus are an immediate threat, not a distant worry. Their proximity slashes warning times, raising the risk of miscalculation or accidental escalation. Military planners are forced to rethink strategies and rewrite playbooks. Russia's move undermines NATO's deterrence and creates a new layer of threat. The alliance now debates, should it reinforce its eastern flank or risk escalation by doing so? Eastern members like Poland and Lithuania demand stronger guarantees and visible support. NATO's unity is being tested. Cracks could be exploited by Moscow. Beyond military concerns, there's alarm over the normalization of nuclear rhetoric. Russian officials speak more casually about nuclear weapons, lowering the threshold for their use. By moving weapons into Belarus, Russia turns nuclear threats into reality. The perception that nuclear arms are just another tool of statecraft is spreading. This shift is perhaps the most dangerous development of all. The world is entering a far more perilous era. Russia's deployment in Belarus shatters the Budapest Memorandum, a cornerstone of post-Cold War security. Belarus gave up its nuclear arsenal in exchange for security guarantees from Russia, the US, and the UK. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and now this deployment have made a mockery of those promises. The message to non-nuclear states is chilling. Security guarantees may not be reliable. This could spark new nuclear ambitions worldwide, undermining decades of non-proliferation efforts. For Eastern Europe, the collapse of the memorandum is a painful lesson. Trust is fragile, and power politics rule. The only real security now seems to lie within NATO's collective defense. The ghost of broken promises haunts Europe's future. Russia's actions in Belarus are part of a global unraveling of nuclear norms. Arms races are accelerating, with new, more sophisticated weapons and delivery systems. The guardrails that once prevented disaster are disappearing. Reckless nuclear rhetoric is now common, especially from Russian officials. This normalization lowers the psychological barrier to nuclear use, making catastrophe more likely. The Non-Proliferation Treaty's grand bargain is under threat as nuclear states expand their arsenals and use them for coercion. Other nations may now reconsider their non-nuclear commitments, risking new arms races. In Eastern Europe, fear is tangible. Iodine pills are in demand, civil defense plans are updated, and nuclear anxiety is back. These are not abstract debates, they are daily realities for millions. The fear of nuclear conflict has returned to everyday life. The psychological burden is heavy. The world is less safe than it was a decade ago. The nuclear threat is no longer theoretical. It's real and present. The future of European security hangs in the balance. NATO's priority is to strengthen its defenses without triggering escalation. This means more readiness, better air and missile defenses, and sharper intelligence on Belarus. Alliance unity will be tested as members debate how far to go. Diplomacy must remain open. Communication channels and risk reduction measures are vital. Small steps like military hotlines could prevent catastrophe. The strategic landscape has changed. There's no easy return to the old order. Europe faces a new era of confrontation and risk. The world is watching, hoping leaders can steer away from disaster. The stakes have never been higher.